we have to do is see the complexity of this problem and the vastness of it. And then we will realize that we are going to have to forget some of these so-called organizational principles and organizational aims and objectives, and realize that the real principle, the real aim, and the real objective is a solution to the problem.
A police state. Just make the Negro neighborhood a police state. It's the most heavily patrolled. It has more police in it than any other neighborhood. Yet it has more crime in it than any other neighborhood. How can you have more cops and more crime? Why? It shows you that the cops must be in cahoots with the criminals. You make my point. That as long as a white man does it, it's all right. A black man is supposed to have no feelings. We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. We want it now, or we don't think anybody should have it.
So whatever kind of action program can be devised to get us the things that are ours by right, then I'm for that kind of action no matter what the action is. I don't think when a man is being criminally treated that some criminal has the right to tell that man what tactics to use to get the criminal off his back. When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever is necessary to get that criminal off my back. And the injustice that has been inflicted upon Negroes in this country by Uncle Sam is criminal. Don't blame a cracker in Georgia for your injustices. The government is responsible for the injustices. The government can bring these injustices to halt. And what you and I have to let the man know is we are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us. But we don't love anybody who doesn't love us.
Mic check, mic check. We are in the building. Hey, what's going on? Peace to the family out there. Uhuru. I am Akima Ajore, your host for tonight on the We Charge Colonialism platform, media and think tank. Want to appreciate you all for tapping in. Whether you're tapping in now or later, it's much appreciated. Make sure you share this, though. Get the word out that this is going to be going on every Sunday and Tuesday for this year. This is the centennial of Malcolm X, Malik El Hajj Shabazz, and we plan to do it right here on We Charge Colonialism. We're going to uplift them throughout the year. I'm definitely involved in a lot of programming that's going to be going on throughout the year around Malcolm X. So stay tuned for all of that. But again, appreciate you for being here. If this is your first time with us, subscribe to the channel. We can also be found at wechargecolonialism.org. So everybody's feeling well. The third one that I'm doing, and as you can tell the title, what the focus is going to be this particular day. The focus is on Malcolm's experience in Ghana. And, we're going to get to that in a second. Before we get into Malcolm's experience in Ghana, just a little, I guess, a review of what we've been covering so far. The first two teachings were on Manny Marable's, the first teaching was on Manny Marable's text, Life and Reinvention, and Les Payne's text, Les Payne's text, Horizon, The Dead Are Arising. So I was looking at not the entire book, but just the first two chapters, how both of those biographies opened up. What were some of the similarities? What were some of the differences? I thought it was pretty good. If you didn't see that one, that was the very first one. And I'm going to be circling back around to that book throughout the year. But it was, I thought it was great, just that opening up, getting that context of the world that Malcolm was being born in, what that world looked like, and what were some of the things that his parents were going through, because his parents are going to have a tremendous impact on his life as well. They're going to shape the young Malcolm, and the things that they go through is going to have an impact on Malcolm. So mind you, Malcolm's father is going to be murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. Some people say that it was an accident. And hopefully my mic, I know sometimes my mic goes in and out, so y'all can let me know if there's any issue with the audio. But yeah, so his father is no longer in his life. His mother is driven insane by the system, not even just by the system, but by the people who are privileged to be in this system, white people who are in that community where his mother Louise Little lives. And one of the things, Les Payne brings out how the family dog was killed by the people in that community. Can you imagine that? The family dog was killed. They were finding it hard to put food on the table because the father, the breadwinner, is no longer there. The mother's having a difficult time getting resources. She has 8 children, soon to be 9 children. The father of her 9th child bails out when he finds out that she's pregnant. So all of that's going on. She's being impacted by that. The younger children, Malcolm, for instance, is being put in foster care. Some of the other younger children as well. So she's dealing with all of that, right? The pressures of life that she's dealing with, though, is a result of living under colonialism. And I think like that's a major thing to like really take too from like some of the those readings. The 2 first episodes that I did, the second one I focused on Malcolm's prison years, with that, his experience in prison, what that was like. And when you look at both of those episodes, and just to sum it all up, you really see Malcolm himself represented Black people. He represented the Black man specifically, and just Black people in general, in regards to what we go through under the system of colonialism. And when you say it, and not just we're talking about systems of oppression. Let me just say that, because there's various forms of oppression, ways that Black people are oppressed under the system. People are oppressed because of gender, sex, ethnicity, race, all of these things, all of these excuses that colonizers make to continue to oppress and exploit us. And so there has been, decades of this happening. When you look at Malcolm's story, Malcolm ends up in prison for the choices that he made, right? But when you read the story and you really look at what Malcolm and his family went through, the system needs have been indicted when we look at it. And I think when we understand, when we do an examination or analysis of Malcolm's experience, and though he was able to overcome, I guess you could say overcome in a sense, because Malcolm is going to be assassinated before he reaches the age of 40. But all of the things that led up to his assassination was a result of living under a system of colonialism. The Nation of Islam itself, an organization that he would join. I mean, Malcolm was susceptible to join the Nation of Islam, being a Black man under a system where he can't live his fullest potential. He's in school and they're telling him that you can't. He wants to be a lawyer. No, you should try carpentry. So they're already placing limits on him. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but it's these were just some thoughts that was going through my mind as I was going back and looking at going back and looking at the text on Malcolm's life. And so I think I'm going to probably be coming to a lot of revelations throughout the year as I do this exegesis on all of these texts. Just seeing things that I haven't seen before. That usually happens when we reread things, right? So again, appreciate everybody for tapping in, and y'all know what to do. Like and share. So I got a copious amount of notes, man, and we're gonna try to do this in an hour, right? So I'm going to try not to digress too much, but sometimes it happens. So again, in this particular episode, the focus is going to be Malcolm's experience in Ghana, Malcolm goes to Ghana twice, right? He's there twice, but really, when we hear about Malcolm being in Ghana, it's that first time, that first experience where he's in Ghana for about a week, right? The second time he goes is not much written about that experience, but Malcolm isn't really, he's kind of incognito on his second trip. You know, they, when he got there, it wasn't even expected. The Malcolm X committee got the call that, you know, he was there 25 minutes before he Ghana, right? So and he only stayed for a few days. He stayed a shorter time than before. But I'll get into that when we get to that point. Um, so we're going to focus on that. Before we get into that, though, uh, just doing research, some of the things that I was coming across again, and it made me think about Malcolm's sort of connection with Ghana before he even goes to Ghana. Malcolm, he does travel overseas. In 1959, he goes overseas. He goes to Saudi Arabia, but he doesn't enter Mecca in 1959, but he is in Saudi Arabia. And that's in 1959. But something else happens in 1959 I think is interesting. Malcolm is going to speak at the African Freedom Day. Now, African Freedom Day is taking place in, but it's a celebration that's taking place on the African continent. So when we talk about African nationalism or Pan-Africanism, this connection of African on this side, the American side of the Atlantic Ocean, and on the African side, we're seeing that with the celebration of African Freedom Day. Now, let me pull this up. This particular, and it's just a little background on African Freedom Day as well. So in March 6, 1957, Ghana wins its independence, right? So that's a major, some context of even this story, as Malcolm is going to go to Ghana 7 years later. But Ghana becomes an independent nation in 1957, the first African nation to gain its independence from colonial rule. In 1958, April 15th, 1958, there's going to be a conference of independent African states. So those other states who are going to win their independence from 57 to 58, and those who never was a quote unquote colony, are going to convene in 1958 on April 15th. This is going to mark the date that's going to become African Freedom Day, a celebration of independence for those African states that are independent. But the struggle is still on to free other African states, right? So that's April 15th. And in 1958, too, what you're going to see is the All-African conference that's going to take place also. So let me backtrack. So April 15th, that's in Accra. That the the Conference of Independent African States is happening in Accra. In 1958, in December, there's going to be another African conference, All-African conference, and Patrice Lumumba is going to be at this conference, and he's going to speak at this conference in December of 1958, which I think is significant as well. So the following year, April 15th, you're going to have the celebration of the first, after a year after that initial meeting, the first African Freedom Day. Now, what I was going to do initially is pull this up. This is a New York Times article on African Freedom Day. Is this it? Let's see. I got two of them right here. So I wanted to read this, right? This is African Freedom Day. The celebration of African Freedom Day in New York in Africa, in New York in Africa, and pretty well everywhere in the world yesterday calls attention again to one of the outstanding phenomena of the contemporary world. This is the sudden, thrilling, agonizing upheaval of the African races after countless centuries of primitiveness, subjection, and isolation from the civilized world. The pressure for emancipation from imperialism and colonialism is already formidable, and it is growing at an accelerating pace. The one-time colonies of the British Empire are either independent, like Ghana, or on their way to freedom like Nigeria. The French colonies are free to stay within or to leave the French community, and Guinea has already opted for independence. Right, and when you look at that, the French colonies are free to stay. And when we're looking at what's taking place now in those francophone countries, with them rising up against their former or current colonial, neo-colonial masters, right? This is something that's going on 70 years ago. So we can see like that struggle still, the struggle for real independence, real control over land and resources didn't end with the independence of these nations, quote unquote independence. So the Belgium and the Portuguese are rolling with the punch and trying to ease into autonomy gradually. The Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland has been having grave trouble owing to the discontent of the overwhelming number of Black Africans compared to the Europeans South Africa is holding grimly to its racist apartheid. Right, Black Africans, isn't that like, Africans are Black? Are there any other Africans? Let me know. Let me know in the chat if there's some other kind of Africans out there that I don't know about. South Africa is holding grimly to its racist apartheid, right? So South Africa, not because they have some other kind of Africans there, is because they have colonizers that are there who are not Africans, right? There's a difference. The problem taken as a whole is one of the most difficult that the Western world has yet faced. The communist, of course, is making hay. This is a wonderful opportunity from the view to espouse the cause of independence. Moscow, as Lenin saw 40 years ago, has everything to gain and nothing to lose by such tactics. Let me make sure everything is good. Just checking. All right. Right. The West cannot oppose a dam against the irresistible tidal wave, but neither can it yield too suddenly. The task is one that calls for equal statesmanship and understanding on the part of the Africans. It must be said in connection with the ceremony held in New York last night that there was a singular lack of such statesmanship in pointedly omitting invitations to Israeli representatives. Africans, like all of us, must realize that freedom is not divisible. I mean, the nerve of the New York Times. And what they say is somewhere in here, I know I glossed over it. Y'all probably caught it. What was it? Something in here about joining the rest of the civilized world. But yeah, right there. This is the sudden, thrilling, agonizing upheaval of the African races at the countless centuries of primitiveness, subjection, and isolation from the civilized world, right? I mean, they think a lot of themselves, don't they? Interesting thing here too, just to stay on this topic of African Freedom Day. Humphrey, who was a senator at the time, is that it? That's not it. Yeah, so if we look here, Hubert Humphrey, April 3rd, Hubert Humphrey, Democrat of Minnesota, introduced a resolution today that the president designate April 15 each year as African Freedom Day. The date was designated as such by the Conference of Independent African States in 1958. Right, that's in 1961. Hubert Humphrey. If you're not familiar with Hubert Humphrey, too, he's someone who they say like authored, or he was the lead author of the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. And he is a colonizer. Gotta be clear on that, man. He's a colonizer. Hey, I mean, I'm sorry, you're not indigenous to this land, so they are colonizers. Not saying that there might be some okay colonizers that's willing to join the revolution. So shout out to them who's willing to commit race suicide. Yeah, I said it. You have to commit race suicide, man. But I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's get back to Malcolm. So I'm going to show this. So we talk about Malcolm. We're talking about African Freedom Day, right? Malcolm speaks at the first African Freedom Day celebration in Harlem, and I want to show that. So this clip right here is first going to be Kwame Nkrumah short clip of Kwame Nkrumah speaking in 1957, and then it's going to jump to Malcolm X speaking at African Freedom Day. So when we think of African Freedom Day, too, African Freedom Day is the predecessor to African Liberation Day. I used to get them both mixed up. I thought that this was African Liberation Day initially, but the timeline didn't match up. So African Freedom Day becomes African Liberation Day once the OAU is formed, Organization of African Unity. So Malcolm X speaking at African Day in 1959.
And now there is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
Who is his enemy? He'll say the Belgians. Ask the man in Kenya who is his enemy, he'll say the British. Ask the man in Morocco who is his enemy, he'll say the French. But the one thing that the French and the British and the Belgians all have in common, they're all from Europe. Is that right or wrong? How could so few white people rule so many black people? This is the thing you should want to know. How could so few? The white man today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing silk. The black man in Africa was cooking and seasoning his food. The black man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars in the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat. Is that right or wrong? Then if the black man in Africa had reached such a high state of civilization so long ago, at a time when the people of Europe were crawling on their all fours, what happened to make these people or enable these people to come out of the cave and come down into our civilization and take it over and hitch us to the plow? What happened? How did they do it? These are the things you should want to find out before you say hooray, hooray, hooray. Is that right or wrong?
No, absolutely, 100%. Hold on, there we go. 100% correct. Yeah, so that's Malcolm at African Freedom Day, dropping that science. That's the question, man. Dr. Amerson Wilson talks about that too. Make sure you study up on some Dr. Amerson Wilson. Falsification of African consciousness being one of them reads, Blueprint for Black Power, Black on Black violence, so on and so on. But Dr. Amerson Wilson, he talks about we have to be literally out of our minds for a minority of people to be able to exercise control over a majority, the vast majority of people in the world. Then those people who they are controlling have to be made crazy. They have to be made out of their mind. They have to be miseducated, indoctrinated, right? So when we have these struggles, to actually assimilate into the system of oppression and exploitation, I think that is a sickness, man. That's a sickness that needs to be examined, needs to be rooted out. But that's what this is all about. So we charge colonialism. We have to have those conversations. We have to begin to get our people to think outside of the thinking systems, the framework that Europeans have placed upon us in those schools. Because when they lock those schools, from generation to generation, we have been taught to think a certain way. We have been taught to accept certain things. And so, yeah, I don't want to digress too much. So actually, I'm not digressing. It's all on point. Before I proceed, again, we're going to get into Malcolm, his experience in Ghana. But I do want to highlight a few things that's going to be coming up. This right here in February 23rd, 2025 in Philadelphia, we're going to have Malcolm X seminar looking at the legacy of Malcolm X and also that last message that Malcolm is going to give on February the 14th. And you can see all of that too on our social media platforms. We'll be promoting on there as well. So make sure you register for that. Looking at Malcolm X again, his last speech given, not necessarily, not technically, it's not his last speech, just to be clear, but it's called The Last Speech and Last Message. Those were the names on those tapes. Who remember who was around long enough when we had the Malcolm X tapes before they moved them to CDs, and now we got YouTube. My introduction to Message to the Grassroots, Follow in or The Bullet, The Last Speech. Those were some cassette tapes that was given to me. It changed my life. Shout out to Kaleem Shabazz. If you are listening, if you're out there, you ever come across this, he was the person who put those cassette tapes in my hand. It wasn't that I didn't know about Malcolm. At that time, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. But reading the autobiography is transformative, right? But listening to those speeches activated me. It made me say, okay, I want to go into the community. Reading the autobiography didn't have me wanting to be an organizer. It had me wanting to know who I was. It had me wanting to study my history, right? Learn more about African people. But it was those cassette tapes that I listened to when Malcolm was talking about community control, right? And he was talking about revolution and resistance. That's what I said, okay, time for me to find organization, time for me to get to work. All right. So yeah, shout out to him. So the second thing, man, that's going to be coming up here in Philadelphia. Come out to this. There's a lot of people, man. There's people from New York who's saying they're going to be traveling down for this. May 17th, the Malcolm X Festival. This is going to be the 10th annual Malcolm X Day Festival. Again, all of this is in the spirit of Malcolm X's centennial, 100 years of Malcolm X. So make sure that you come out for that. And last but not least, if you want to support the Malcolm X Festival, you can support by Cash Apping CMXD PHL 65. Send whatever, send $1, $2, $5. It all adds up at the end of the day. Send $1,000, but it's all going to the organizing of the Malcolm X Day Festival. 100% of that is going to go to that. So appreciate you if you can do that. But if you can't, it's all good. No pressure. So let's get into it, man. Like some of the sources that I was looking at for this podcast right here. It's a lot of information. I'm not going to lie, but some of the authors are saying the same things. But you may be interested and want to go out there and look at some of these works. The Diary of Malcolm X, edited by Herb Boyd and Elysia Al-Shabazz. Elysia Al-Shabazz. I can never get the name right, but excuse me if you're listening, my sister. Ilyasa, there you go, Ilyasa Al-Shabazz. Then there's the American Africans in Ghana. That's another one, American Africans in Ghana. There's a chapter in that book that discusses Malcolm's experience in Ghana. And what a lot of these authors do too, because there's not really a lot. He was there for a week, so it's not like they're speaking about every single thing that he did in Ghana. So there's like some analysis of what's taking place. Like what does it all mean? What does his Ghana experience, like what does that entail? How did it impact Malcolm? How did Malcolm impact the people of Ghana? Right. So you get a lot of that, right? The sort of what does it mean in the grand scheme of things, that experience? And it meant a lot, man. Malcolm is going to be transformed through his experience in Ghana. I mean, he visits several African countries, but Ghana becomes like the highlight for him. And his experience, not just with Nkrumah, but with the students, the college students in Ghana, the organizers in Ghana, those African Americans who are going to migrate to go to Ghana to be a part of the rebuilding of independent Ghana state, right? All of that is sort of discussed in these different texts. Another one, Malcolm X, The Man in His Times, edited by Dr. John Henry Clark. That's another text that I looked at, and particularly Leslie Lacey's article in that text. So Leslie Lacey has an article, Malcolm X in Ghana, right? So there's works that really just focus on just Malcolm X in Ghana. So he writes this. Leslie Lacey has a few works on Malcolm X in Ghana. So there's another one. Leslie Lacey writes The Rise and Fall of a Proper Negro, and he has a chapter. He actually has two chapters in there: The Coming of Malcolm X, and then he has another chapter called The Return. But the Return chapter is the same chapter remixed and put in the Malcolm X and the Man in His Times. So really, in the article he writes in The Man in His Times is actually better than the article he writes in, or the chapter that's in Return. But those are some other works. And Leslie Lacey writes African Response to Malcolm X as well. So there's several works that he writes. And the reason why he's writing so much, and I think like he's a good source, is because Leslie Lacey is one of the people who are part of what they formed, the Malcolm X Committee. That is going to be a committee of African Americans or Africans from America who are in Ghana. And they're going to be the ones who is going to organize the speaking engagements and meet Malcolm X when he comes to Ghana. So Maya Angelou, and I get to all of the people who are some of the people who are part of that in a second. But Leslie Lacey is one of those people, and so he's like there. Malcolm's experiences in Ghana, he's there to witness and observe many of those experiences. So he's a good authority, or a good source, I should say. Malcolm X Speaks is another one. Selected Speeches and Statements by George Brightman, edited by George Brightman, is another one. And there's a letter in that book that I'm going to get to in a minute. Malcolm X Portable Reader, edited by Manny Marable and Garrett Felber. Malcolm X in Africa, which is another good one in a sense. He's talking, well, actually he and she, Asenso and Yvette Alex Asenso, right? A.B. Asenso and Yvette Alex Asenso are the co-authors of Malcolm X in Africa. And it's a pretty good book, right? So a lot of people don't know that there is a book out there that is covering Malcolm X's complete experience in Africa. Now, is not very. I think there's a lot of things that are left out in that text. I'm gonna say in regards to when for instance, talking about Ghana, when they're talking about Ghana, the Asenbos are talking about Malcolm's experience in Ghana. They only spent, it seems as though that chapter, which is supposed to be dedicated to Malcolm's experience in West Africa, actually, they only spend a few pages speaking on Malcolm's experience in West Africa. And the rest of the chapter is spent more so talking about Malcolm at the OAU conference in Cairo. And so, I mean, we go from West Africa to Egypt, and there's more discussion. So I don't know, some of those, I'm not here to like do a whole lot of criticism, but there was just like some things I seen in some of these sources where they kind of just like digress. But I do that too when I'm speaking. So I'm not mad at them. So Malcolm X and Pan-Africanism is another text, article, I should say, by George Clay Key Jr. I thought that was a good one. And actually, this was the first text particular text, Malcolm X and Pan-Africa, which was written, I think, in 1992, really led me to a plethora of articles that's written about Malcolm X and sort of his Pan-African ideology, or Malcolm X being a Pan-Africanist. Prior to reading this text, I didn't know there were so many texts out there that really discusses Malcolm X's Malcolm X being a Pan-Africanist. But some of the things I'm noticing with that is that they're not really getting into Malcolm's framework. It's almost as if they're saying like Malcolm really didn't develop a framework for Pan-Africanism, but I disagree with that. And I'm I'm not going to get in too much why, because I'm actually writing an article on that. So we're going to say that Malcolm X's collected speeches is another one, and Malcolm X FBI files. So those are, I know those a lot of sources in case people are interested and want to read more about Malcolm's experience in Ghana. You could check those out. And so Malcolm, he says that the Ghana trip was the highlight trip. So of all the places, Malcolm is going to go to Ghana after he makes pilgrimage or Hajj at Mecca. And he still places Ghana as the highlight, man, of his entire trip. So that just shows like how much of an impact Ghana is going to have on him on that first trip. Like I said earlier, he goes twice. And so I'm gonna give a timeline of Malcolm in Ghana, and then there's a clip that I have of Malcolm speaking about his experience in Ghana. So on April 7th, 1964, Malcolm is going to borrow some funds from his sister Ellen Collins, and he's going to purchase a one-way ticket um, to Cairo. He's going to make stops at Jeddah. Well, he makes stops at Cairo, Jeddah, Khartoum, not in this order, but Khartoum, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in case people don't know, Nairobi, Accra, Algiers, and Lagos. Those are the places he's going to stop on his first trip. Now, remember, Malcolm goes back to Africa. He comes back to the Americas, and then he's going to travel to Africa. And when he goes back to Africa, he's going to visit several other East African countries, Tanzania. I think he spent some time in Zambia, Zanzibar. What wasn't Tanzania at the time, but Tanganyika, Zanzibar, Kenya. Right, so he visits these other places on his trip. Ethiopia is another place. But on his first trip, those were the places that he's going to go to. He's going to fly under the name Malik El Shabazz. He doesn't fly as Malcolm X. He flies as Malik El Shabazz. And as I mentioned, he goes and make Hajj first, and then he travels to Nigeria. Not directly to Nigeria afterwards, but he ends up at some point in Nigeria. And from Nigeria, he goes to Ghana. So May 10th is when he is in Ghana. He's going to stay in Ghana from May 10th to May 17th. He arrives in Ghana, as I mentioned. He's greeted by a next committee that's formed by American Africans or African Americans that's in Ghana. Those people, some of those people are Julian Mayfield, Anna Livia Cordera, Preston King, Alice Wyndham, and Leslie Lacey, as I mentioned, and Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou is part of that crew that's going to greet Malcolm X. He's going to stay at the Ambassador Hotel, and he stays there courtesy of the Ghanaian press. Malcolm, he's going to spend his first couple of days there in a series of meetings. So mind you, like Malcolm is not even expected to meet with the prime minister. He's not expected to meet with government. That is not on the itinerary initially. But once he gets there, like the red carpet is sort of rolled out for him. But the other thing too, and something that I'm noticing amongst the African leaders, King seems to be like the man. Like everybody is leaning more towards Dr. King. Not necessarily, maybe not the philosophy of nonviolence, but they're looking at King as like the hero. Not the hero, but the leader. The leader of the Black community in the United States. Not even just one of the leaders, but the leader. And so Malcolm X, who at this time is no longer in the Nation of Islam, but he's only a few months. We're talking about he's going to Africa, or he's going to Mecca in April. So he's like 2 months, I think, removed. Like February is like official that he's not going back to the Nation of Islam. And I think in March he makes the announcement that he is no longer in the Nation of Islam. So with that being said, now you're talking about a month or so later, he's traveling abroad. So I can imagine like leaders that still have this picture of this fiery Malcolm, who's still fiery, but this fiery Malcolm who, he's claiming that white people are the devil. This is the perception of him, and you know how the media was portraying Malcolm X at this time, right? They were making Malcolm look like he was the enemy to just humanity in general, not just white people, but to humanity, and he was dangerous. So if you recall, I think I mentioned in I don't know if it was one of the two episodes that I did or part of the series, but we talked about Julius Nyerere. And Julius Nyerere not even wanting to meet with Malcolm initially, but it took like Abdul Rahman Babu, aka Babu, to make that meeting happen with Julius Nyerere in Tanzania when Malcolm was in Tanzania. So with that being said, though Julius Nyerere is going to embrace Malcolm afterwards once he meet him, but I think it's like Malcolm is now having to like clean up his image. He's not the same person with the same ideas, but still revolutionary. Still understand the contradictions of colonialism and racism, but his philosophy has evolved. So going back to again, this trip, some of these meetings that he's going to find himself in wasn't initially planned out. So he's going to spend his first 2 days in a series of meetings with Cuban ambassador who is over there, Armando Entrago Gonzalez. He meets with Ghana Minister of Defense Kofi Boaka, and so he's going to give a lecture too. It was recorded that he gives a lecture at the Accra Press Club. Now I couldn't find much on the speech because some of these people, that's another thing. Like some of the authors do a bad job with timelines. I'm big on timelines. Like when this happened, like what month was it? What year? And so, right? So everybody doesn't do that. The FBI files does it. The FBI files do a good job on timelines, so they're a good source to get some of those dates. But even with the FBI files didn't know that Malcolm met with Nkrumah. At least, like probably later on, but at least in the files, the initial report was that Malcolm didn't meet with government officials. He didn't meet with Nkrumah. So the other side of that is like there's somebody reporting, Malcolm's every move. I talked about this with Dr. John Henry Clark when we was looking at Dr. John Henry Clark's files. It's like they're talking about he went to this restaurant and he ate such and such and he did this. He's dating this person. Like it's ridiculous. It's crazy. And this is somebody who he's being targeted because of his ideas. Let me see what we got here. Hey, peace to everybody too for tapping in, man. I know I'm just kind of just like in my zone, but I appreciate y'all, Sugar, Shabaka, and Kruma. Generation Love, the leader of the highest priest community vessel, has the opportunity to wrestle this theory and practice. That's too deep. It's too deep, Generation Love. We ain't trying to get that deep right now, man. And I'm looking at it, Nkrumah. Hey, I'm kind of like same time in Nkrumah, same time. I'm like, hey, it's too deep right now. But so on he gives a lecture at the Accra Press Club. Peace, Toronto. I'll see y'all soon, man. I'm getting to Toronto soon. Trust that. On May 13th, he's going to speak at the University of Ghana on the topic, Will Africa Ignite American Racial Powder Keg? And I got a New York Times article that is even talking about, Malcolm. So it's the this particular speech or lecture at the University of Accra, University of Ghana, is going to get media attention, CIA, attention. So it gets back to America, the things that are going to be discussed at this particular Uhuru, this particular on this particular day, May 13th. So important day. And we have a written record too of what Malcolm says on May 13th. We don't have time to like really dissect that, but we have all year. So trust me, we'll get back around to it. So will Africa ignite America's racial powder keg? I do want to kind of look at like the word getting back. So you got Malcolm, who is in Africa. He can't even give a speech without the New Year. So you know this is big time right here. Which one? Here we go. Boom. So yeah, New York Times. On Malcolm's top, can he live? Can he live? And so Malcolm X, you know, May 12th, but the record says May 13th. This was given. So May 12th, Malcolm X, the Black nationalist leader, said today that everywhere he had been in Africa, he felt more at home than I have ever felt in America. Malcolm, who left the United States about a month ago to visit Mecca in Africa, arrived here last night from Nigeria. He has also been to East Africa. He said at a press conference today that African nations should not restrict themselves to pointing a finger at South Africa in the United Nations, but should take up American racial segregation at the World Organization. What is going on in the United States, he said, is worse than what is going on in South Africa. He said the American system perpetuates the enslavement of the Negro. Malcolm said the essence of his trip to Africa was to establish communications and good relations between the Africans at home and the Africans in America. And, you know, Malcolm, when he comes back the second time, he is going to go to OAU, the OAU conference. At that time, when he goes to the OAU conference in Cairo, when he goes there, he goes as a representative of the OAAU, right, Organization of Afro-American Unity, and he's granted observer status. He does a lot of politicking too, man, to be able to even be there as observer status and put the issue of Africans in America, put that issue on the table, right, and to fight. But again, I'm gonna do a podcast. I'm gonna do a teaching on that though. His experience there at Cairo. So May 14th, he's going to address the Ghanaian Parliament. Ghanaian Parliament. That's May 14th. May 15th, he's going to meet Shirley Du Bois, and maybe not in this order, but on that day, he does meet up with W.B. Du Bois's wife, Shirley Du Bois, who's going to set up a meeting with Kwame Nkrumah, right? She's the one who's going to broker. And prior to even meeting with Malcolm X, Shirley Du Bois also had a perception of Malcolm X and wasn't looking to meet up with Malcolm X. The Malcolm X committee was able to make that happen. And after meeting up with Malcolm X, she adopted Malcolm X as her son, right? She said, "You're my son now." So Shirley Du Bois is going to make that connection and get Malcolm to meet with Nkrumah, and Malcolm's going to spend at least an hour with Nkrumah. But before he meets up with Nkrumah, he's going to address about 200 students at the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute in Winneba. He's also going to meet with the Nigerian High Commissioner Alhaj Issa Wali. And then on May 17th, Malcolm encountered Muhammad Ali at a hotel in Accra. And, you know, that was an uncomfortable meeting. Muhammad Ali, of course, going to shun Malcolm X, dismiss him. And, because of, Malcolm's break with the Nation of Islam and Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay, embracing of Elijah Muhammad. So his once friend, Muhammad Ali, is just gave him the cold shoulder at the hotel. And then that's May 17th. Malcolm is going to leave Ghana on May 17th. The next stop for Malcolm X, I believe, is going to be Liberia. He doesn't spend much time in Liberia, though. I don't know if he leaves the airport. His initial visit to Liberia, because the government of Liberia basically was treating him like Marcus Garvey. Man, America did a job on Liberia, boy. But the government wanted to distance themselves with Malcolm X. They didn't want even the journalist who recorded the interview with Malcolm X at the airport. That tape was said to be destroyed. That would have been some powerful history if we had that recording. But that tape was said to have been destroyed. So Malcolm, he goes to the airport in Liberia and then he leaves. Now, though that happened the first time, Malcolm, he does. The interesting thing, like one of the articles that I read, Malcolm X and Pan-Africanism, the author talks about that experience in Liberia, but at the time, I guess he wasn't privy to. This was written in '92, so he wasn't privy to Malcolm's second trip and Malcolm going to Liberia and spending about 2 days in Liberia. So Malcolm is going to have a different experience when he visits Liberia on his second trip abroad. He spends 2 days in Liberia, and this is recorded in his letters. If you read the Malcolm X, the Diary of Malcolm X, edited by Boyd and Ilyasa Al-Shabazz, if you read that, Malcolm's daughter, you read those letters and he talks about his experience in Liberia. And I found that interesting too when I was reading it, because even with Les Lacey, he talks about Malcolm when he came the second time to Ghana, he looked completely different. So mind you, Malcolm goes back, he leaves Africa. Check this timeline out, so maybe it makes sense. I'm just looking at it. Malcolm, he leaves the Nation of Islam, or gets kicked out of the Nation of Islam. That's and he makes it official in March, makes it public in March. He goes to abroad in April. He comes back to the Americas, I believe, in, I want to say June, mid-June, but he goes back abroad in July. So he comes back to America for maybe 4 weeks or more, 4 to 6 weeks. Then he goes back abroad. That time that he came back must have been, heavy on him, because now when he goes back abroad, he has a different, and particularly when he gets to Ghana. Mind you, on his second trip, he's poisoned too in Cairo. So he knows people are out to kill him. And when he's in Ghana, Les Lacey is saying that, he has a different energy and vibe. He seems like concerned and worried. When I'm reading his diaries on his second trip abroad, particularly like his time in Liberia, his time in Ghana, Malcolm is like he's drinking, like he's writing in his letters. He's talking about, somebody offered him some Coke and rum to relax, he took it. He had this strong Chinese drink. He didn't know what it was, but it was a strong Chinese drink. So I'm noticing like this is different from the Malcolm before. Malcolm's not, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink. And even like the Malcolm committee, it's funny because when Malcolm X comes to Ghana, that like all of the African Americans are talking about they can't smoke, they can't drink, basically out of respect for Malcolm when he gets there. So it's like, we got to be pure. We got this pure leader coming. We can't do none of these things. And that's an interesting. It's interesting too in regards to how the African Americans were acting over in Ghana. That's something I would like to. I think we can revisit this conversation abroad too, because I actually can't get it all in. Well, Malcolm, he's gonna leave Ghana. The other thing I wanted to say too, I don't want to miss this part. So I talked about his drinking. The other thing is like Malcolm he's writing how he's taking these sleeping pills as well. Like every night he's taking a sleeping pill. I'm like, yo, like what's going on? But I'm just like everything that Malcolm is going through, like I can imagine, man. He's like taking these pills to help him sleep, help to relax, right? So he's going through a lot at this particular time. But I thought that was interesting to read that. So after his second trip, he learned that there's going to be a Malcolm X society in Ghana that was formed. That's how much of an impact Malcolm is going to have when he's in Ghana. Students are going to form a Malcolm X society. When he speaks at the University of Ghana, the group that organized that in particular for him to speak at the university is going to be the Marxist Forum that organizes that. And the African American group is a little nervous, because of the politics of the Marxist Forum, and they're worried that they won't be receptive of Malcolm X. But when you read the African response by Les Lacey, he talks about the positive reaction that was given to Malcolm X, and someone called it a violent elation. Like they were impressed, they were thrilled, and excited to see Malcolm and to hear Malcolm. Malcolm is also going to be given a Ghanaian name as well, Asibel, I believe, and I had to write down the meaning for that one. So we know Omowale. We know he was given that name when he went to Nigeria, but he goes to Ghana and he receives a name as well. Which I have here somewhere, Asibel. And again, that means like connection to family, heritage, lineage, cousin. Vicky Garvin. I didn't even say Vicky Garvin. Hey, appreciate you saying that too. Vicky Garvin was a part of that committee as well. So I missed that. Failed to mention that, but thank you. So the other thing, so let me get into. I want to play this video of Malcolm talking about his experience in Ghana. 1 second.
The country in Africa that impressed me the most with its progressiveness was Ghana. And Ghana, it's not an accident that Ghana is the country in Africa that the white man here in the West seems to be the most worried about. It's actually the most progressive. The attitude when you arrive in Ghana, you can see, is an attitude of confidence among the Ghanaians. And while I was there, I had an opportunity to speak at the University of Accra in Legon, outside of Ghana, and also at the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute in Winneba, which is a little farther away from Accra. Also, I had a chance to speak before the Ghanaian members of parliament, and also to President Nkrumah himself. And in each of these occasions, most of my time was spent describing the true plight of the black people in this country and the hypocrisy of the American government in dealing with the problem, and the inability of the American government to really and truly deal with this problem. And while I was in Ghana, since Ghana is actually the one country in Africa where you have where everyone is headquartered, and I had an opportunity, I believe, to speak to around 15 different ambassadors from different countries, and on nothing but the race problem in this country, and why these countries have been so silent on it at the governmental level, while at the same time they're so vocal on the situation that exists in South Africa and Angola. The defense minister of Ghana, Kofi Bako, gave a dinner in my honor, at which I had an opportunity to meet most of the African, the very prominent and influential African leaders. And I might add, to show you what a down-to-earth this particular man is, he's the counterpart of in his country, of McNamara in this country. And in the car that I was leaving his home in stalled, and this man is so down to earth, he got out and pushed it. He was pushing our car to try and help us get it started. And I very much doubt if you find very many people in other countries of his particular position who would do the same thing. Yet at the same time, you hear all of this propaganda in America about the type of government that the Ghanaians have over them. When you go there, you find that all of them make you relax. They're down-to-earth persons. They're not what you call a dictator. They don't throw their weight around. But at the same time that they don't throw their weight around, they let you know that they're confident in their ability to guide their country in the right direction, and in a direction that is of most benefit to the Ghanaian people. The country in Africa that impressed me the most with its progressiveness was Ghana.
Right on. So of course that was after his trip to and Malcolm, you know, there's going to be some discussions of Malcolm pointing out a lot of the contradictions with the African nations, independent African nations, and even you know, he began to understand the impact of neocolonialism and the power of the American on African So even those who profess to be revolutionaries and progressive thinkers, turned out to disappoint Malcolm in a sense. But he understood um, the power of colonialism. Let me see, appreciate it. Yeah. Appreciate everybody for tapping in. We at the top of our last thing I want to just leave off with, and I think I want to revisit. I'm actually going to talk about Ghana again when I look at some of these other experiences that Malcolm has throughout Africa and Saudi Arabia, because it's all connected. Because I feel like I couldn't get to a lot. I thought I had enough time, but an hour isn't a lot of time, to be honest. But I do want to at least get to this statement that Malcolm makes in the selected speeches and statements edited by George Brightman. And he's going to talk about his experience in Nigeria and Ghana. You see, May 11th. So this is a day after his arrival in Ghana. What do we got going on here? What's going on here? All right. I arrived in Accra yesterday from Lagos. Let me make sure. Okay, yeah. So I arrived in Accra yesterday from Lagos, Nigeria. The natural beauty and wealth of Nigeria and its people are indescribable. It is full of Americans and other whites who are well aware of untapped natural resources. The same whites who spit in the face of blacks in America and sick these dogs upon us to keep us from integrating with them are seen throughout Africa, bowing, grinning, and smiling in an effort to integrate with the Africans. They want to integrate into Africa's wealth and beauty. This is ironical. This continent has such a great fertility, and the soil is so profusely vegetated that while modern agricultural methods, it could easily become the breadbasket of the world. I spoke at Ibadan University in Nigeria Friday night and gave the true picture of our plight in America and of the necessity of the independent African nations helping us bring our case before the United Nations. The reception of the students was tremendous. They made me an honorary member of the Muslim Student Society of Nigeria and renamed me Omawali, which means the child has come home in Yoruba language. The people of Nigeria are strongly concerned with the problems of their African brothers in America, but the U.S. information agencies in Africa create the impression that progress is being made and the problem is being solved. Upon close study, one can easily see a gigantic design to keep Africans here and the African Americans from getting together. An African official told me when one finds the number of peoples from descent in South Central and North Africa, they total well a million. One can understand the attempts to keep the Africans from ever uniting with the African Americans. Unity between the Africans of the West and the Africans of the fatherland will well change the course of history. Being in Ghana now, the fountainhead of Pan-Africanism, the last days of my tour should be intensely interesting and enlightening. Just as an American Jew is in harmony politically, economically, and culturally with world Jewry, it is time for all African Americans to become an integral part of the world's Pan-Africanists. And even though we might remain in America physically while fighting for the benefits the Constitution guarantees us, we must return to Africa philosophically and culturally and develop a working unity in the framework of Pan-Africanism. And that's a statement from Malcolm X, man. I think it gets no clearer than that. That's from the selected speeches, Malcolm X selected speeches and statements, edited by George Brightman. It is in our book drive. I believe you probably have access to our book drive, but you can, if anybody doesn't have access to it, usually in the description is our book club description, so you can go into our book drive to get that the link to that as well. What y'all watching? What y'all chatting about over there? But yeah, that's Malcolm X on that concept, and that's something that I want to dig deeper into as well. Is like to talk about this framework that Malcolm X is developing, which many people will call, Pan-Africanism, you could say it's a brand of that. But I think Malcolm was, developing something where you can separate that something. It wasn't a bourgeois Pan-Africanism. I'm going to say that, man. You know what I'm saying? He was developing a revolutionary brand of African internationalism. I think it would lead to, some of the development of a stronger African nationalist theory. So, to Chairman Omali Yeshit, who developed the theory of African internationalism. And, he would point to Malcolm X as someone as being like that ideological father of the Black Power movement. And when you look at many of the organizations that are going to be established throughout the 60s, the mid 60s, throughout the mid 60s up into the late 60s, such as the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, the US organization. What are some of the others? The core is going to change their political philosophy, right, and become this Black nationalist organization. But all of these organizations, in some sense, were influenced by Malcolm X's revolutionary Pan-Africanism, because Malcolm X wasn't looking, his end goal wasn't to be a part of the empire. Malcolm X was looking to build African nations, or African communities, I should say, throughout the world, and have them come together to form a united sort of African nation, African state. So he looked to focus in America, get the Africans to come together in America and form a community, and then to build with Africans in Jamaica and Haiti who would do the same, organize where they are, not necessarily as Jamaicans and as Haitians, but as Africans in America, and come together and create this African sort of American state. But for the sake of building a bridge and building that bridge across the ocean to the Africans on the continent, and create this one African community. And it's not, Malcolm was someone who understood that there are other oppressed groups around the world. So I think Malcolm's ultimate goal was to liberate all of humanity, right? But it was sort of that Marcus Garvey, philosophy of African first. We have to build African first before we're able to, put our focus on any other communities. But at the same time, the number one contradiction, I think, in this system, colonial capitalist system, is the one that exists between the European and the African, because there's a racial element to it. I don't want to I'm digressing. But the hour. We are past the hour. But, before you jump off, make sure you like and share this with someone. Subscribe if this is your first time with us. Sundays and Tuesdays, I'm going to continue to do this. And again, CMXD, let me put that up there. If you want to support the Malcolm X Day Festival, 10th annual Malcolm X Day Festival, with 10 years in, you can, support by sending something to CMXD, PHL 65. Oh, if you do that, I forgot to mention this earlier. If you do, put WCC in the note, put WCC, because I want them to know that it's you guys that are supporting. The ones who are tapped in here, you're the ones who are supporting the festival for sure. And make sure you're there in Philadelphia, Malcolm X Festival at Malcolm. And so next time we do this is Sunday. We may have a book club on Saturday. But if you subscribe and hit the notifications, when we got something going on. So until next time, man, peace, uhuru.
The white power structure, because that's all we have in America. And the white power structure today is just as much interested in perpetuating slavery as the white power structure was 100 years ago. Only now they use modern methods of doing so. And realizing that the black people in this country are waking up and becoming filled with a desire to be looked upon as men and as human beings. the white power structure to slow down that struggle for freedom and human dignity uses tricks. 100 years ago, they could do it with chains. Today, they use tricks. And one of the tricks that they've invented is this token integration, to get Negroes, so-called Negro leaders, to accept a few token crumbs of integration that don't solve any problem for the masses of black people in this country whatsoever, but it does make the hand-picked Negroes be satisfied to slow down the cry of the masses. And a good example of that is as soon as the spirit of rebellion or revolution began to spread among the masses of black people in this country, and they began to take an active part, and they showed that they weren't confined to this nonviolent approach, then the government or the power structure began to sit up and take notice and